Distinguished guests and participants of NextRise 2020, it is an absolute honor and pleasure to have this opportunity to share a perspective on the present changing landscape of doing business in Europe and how this presents new challenges and very real opportunities for innovative Korean companies. At Foundry Europe, we work closely with various Korean organizations and private companies to plan and coordinate the structured commercial expansion of Korean business across Europe and have done so both before and during the current economic context resulting from this recent pandemic. And we happen to call Europe our home. But I, myself, am originally from the United States. I've spent the past 20 years living and working in market strategic services in different parts of Europe. And after all this time, I still find Europe to be a truly fascinating place. In such a relatively small geographical area, there are so many different cultures with rich traditions and history butting right up against each other. Yet it still works as an economy. It's because in the past many decades, there has been such a concerted effort to put in place mechanisms and frameworks to overcome these cultural disparities in the pursuit of stability through economic prosperity. The result of this is that Europe, or more specifically the European Union, has now become a very large and vibrant marketplace. And Korean companies eyeing global expansion strategies must at some point consider it, as at last measure, the EU was the world's second largest economy, representing about 22% of the world's GDP. And as foreign cultures go, Korea enjoys quite a few advantages here. Europeans hold a positive view of Koreans, and Korea itself is perceived to be a place of dynamic innovation. And Europe, it turns out, loves K-pop and Korean cosmetics. And Europeans hold big Korean tech brands in very high regard. But though Europe is a very large economic region, it also happens to be a very fragmented one, made up of 27 countries in the European Union alone, and many more besides. Europe can be challenging for Korean companies even in the best of times. In our experience, the way Korean companies tend to plan expansion in Europe is by using one of two conventional approaches. The one most often preferred is the sales partnership model, whereby a local partner, either for sales or distribution, takes the lead with the assumption that the local partner is familiar with the market and can make decisions on behalf of the Korean business. Though this may mitigate risk and lead to faster sales, Korean companies do give up control, which can hamper long-term growth. In very large, homogeneous markets like the United States or China, a good distributor can penetrate a wide expanse of geography. But in a fragmented marketplace like Europe, being successful in one part does not guarantee success in another, so limitations related to geography, exclusivity, and usually even IP rights eventually stall growth. A second approach you could call commercial establishment, where the Korean business seeks to set up some level of commercial operations on their own or with local partners with the intent to develop a growth model in Europe. This takes planning and requires a longer horizon perspective and geographical considerations from the start, but the reward is much greater. With both of these approaches, the idea is to take an existing offering that has shown success in Korea and effectively port it to Europe with some alterations. As said, in the best of times, Europe can be challenging, and in these times, bringing a business, even one that has proven successful elsewhere, into a market that is in flux is particularly daunting and likely unduly risky. Another approach, which is usually viewed as supplemental but can serve as a primary expansion strategy in its own right, is open innovation. Fundamentally, the difference is that instead of bringing an offering to European markets, the idea is to bring know-how and capabilities to generate and scale innovation in market. In the context of global expansion, there are two models of open innovation. Inclusion, where one business seeks to include innovation from another in its activity, perhaps by granting access to a supply chain or customer network, or even absorbing it into its operations. A typical example is, of course, when corporates engage innovative startups. For open innovation, there is also what you can call joint development, which is more a partnership of equals, with a goal to join forces in providing new solutions in market or bundling existing complementary solutions to form a new market-relevant offering. This concept of bundling is especially interesting when new categories abruptly arise that require solutions that span pre-existing areas of need, such as during a general disruption that causes organizations to scramble for support. And at this moment in history, there has been a universal shock to the system. And by universal, I mean that everyone around the world is affected, and every business must adapt in some way, either financially, operationally, or commercially. Adapting, by definition, is changing. Change calls for new ideas, and ideas mean innovation. So now more than ever before, there is incredible opportunity for open innovation and collaboration, as literally every company must adapt. In normal times, innovation is driven by the impetus for growth. As things stand now, innovation might very soon become existential. So everyone has to change, has to innovate, but this presents a very real dilemma. In times of crisis, the tendency for most companies is to secure and defend their resources. In other words, to avoid risk. Yet the world is changing in many unforeseen ways, so every business has to adapt, and that means taking risks. Though companies may not want to change, they kind of have to. To mitigate the risk of change, they will look to remove as much uncertainty as possible. This likely means that when European companies seek innovation to support this change, they will first look internally, then they will look to people and partners they know, and if not, that they at least understand. It is unlikely that they will actively seek solutions abroad from sources they do not know, even if they are open to it. It does seem safe to say that as things stand, Korea has to be considered one of the world's foremost thought leaders in innovating a way out of this crisis. Europe could certainly benefit from Korean innovation, and not just at government levels or for companies in the hardest hit sectors like travel, hospitality, and retail. It is worth repeating that every business must change in ways that we just don't know. As markets morph, customer behavior shifts, as consumption patterns change, as compliance to new regulations necessitate adapting operations and supply chains, and as all the thousands of new ideas will call for new ideas. From this perspective, there is ample opportunity in Europe for Korean innovators, but with so much ambiguity and uncertainty on the market, there is also a need for a slightly revised paradigm for expansion. It is less about finding customers for your product than it is about identifying where your know-how and capabilities can add value for the innovation needed for markets to stabilize and move forward. Given the fluidity of circumstances, there is clearly a need for nimble speed and the willingness and ability to adapt. This means focusing on a very paradigm mission, removing as many variables as possible. And I know this is not a serious problem for Korean businesses. During the past few months, we have seen many examples of companies switching business models, producing products that a couple months ago wouldn't have made any sense, using their technologies to bring new solutions to market, and joining forces with other Korean companies to address new needs. This happened in Korea. We also need to make this possible in Europe. In general, when considering market expansion, the 6 basic steps are 1, define the commercial mission as your working hypothesis. 2, ensure market feasibility of that mission. 3, validate the offering and market. 4, plan the business, financial, and actions needed using those findings and insights. 5, prepare sales, brand, and operations. And 6, deploy. However, for effective planning, you must work with the assumption that conditions are stable and that the market will not shift as you make the requisite steps in progressing into that market. This tends to work quite well in a region like Europe that over time has been reliably stable. But right now, conditions are far from being stable or predictable. We simply do not know what is going to happen. There is, however, one prevailing constant: the pervasive need for widespread innovation across all markets and all sectors of the European economy. It turns out that that constant can provide the basis needed for planning. The difference being that the objective is not planning on how to bring an existing offering into this unstable market. Existing products and services were conceived in a very different context before the current situation, and based on a set of needs and priorities that may be different than what we're seeing today. But if you think about it, you as a company are not your products. Your products are the results of the many different inputs which make you unique. Your expertise, your know-how, the passion that led to your solutions in the first place. It's your network and all the capabilities that allow you to deliver your solutions. And that is what is needed right now in Europe as we address issues and market forces that are unprecedented and unpredictable. So the key is to understand what your real value is and what things are needed for you to ultimately arrive at that package of applied value that you inherently have right now, and how you can take those assets to a European marketplace that surely and so sorely needs innovation. The same steps for planning still apply. You just need to consider what the actual product is. So again, define your mission here and how you believe your know-how, capabilities, technology, and network can create value, but with the understanding that companies in this period of adjustment and constant change will have a literal hierarchy of innovation needs that range from the very basics of survival and stabilization through optimization and eventually, hopefully, market repositioning and growth. And through most of this, there will be a persistent priority on cash management at the moment. So we all have to be innovative in how we define needs or supply innovation itself. Step 2, go make sure that Europe as a marketplace will even allow you to do what it is you think you can offer given the landscape. And then validate your hypothesis by finding partners and potential companies who could benefit from either utilizing or commercializing your know-how, capabilities, technologies, perhaps even a patent or two, and your network. And then plan together how you will generate relevant innovation. In general, when you expand to a market, you assume stability. At the moment, we find ourselves in a market that is transitioning. And this transitional marketplace that we find ourselves in will continue to morph, change, and develop into a new societal and commercial landscape to some degree. As it does, we will need the innovation and creativity for dealing with the situation at such a rapid pace that Korean businesses have shown that they can deliver against. So you could argue that Europe could use Korean innovation now more than ever. However, it is unlikely that connecting what Europe needs to what Korea has to offer will happen naturally. What is required is a more systematic approach for connecting that dynamism with those who can benefit here in Europe. Over the course of the coming weeks, months, and perhaps years, there will be a need to have in place the things that can facilitate that connection. Fortunately, a lot of groundwork for this has already been laid, such as the support provided by KITA through their interbranch initiatives and open innovation facilities like, of course, NextRise. And this coming year, we will also see an unprecedented number of hackathons, matchathons, and calls for projects along with new concepts like dedicated test beds in Europe to better conceptualize and contextualize innovation in the hardest hit sectors. Because as we've learned during the initial phase of this most recent crisis, governments have proven that they can actually organize themselves quickly to identify solutions. And they are indeed ready to act fast when decisions have been made. Therefore, open innovation and test beds will likely become even more important as means to systematically validate and facilitate deployment. But without a deliberate and collective effort from both sides, there is a risk that in this time of rampant uncertainty, markets will become insular, much as they've done in past crises. We must work together and figure out, especially now, this year in 2020, how we can and will build bridges that last. So in summary, when considering a global expansion strategy, Europe as an economic region must be on the radar. And Koreans do enjoy several built-in advantages and have a favorable image. But Europe as a fragmented marketplace has proven challenging for Korean companies in the best of times. And in 2020, the market will be in flux, and conventional approaches for expansion in Europe of porting existing offerings or replicating existing Korean businesses during times of market discontinuity can be risky. In this market of 2020, there will be a constant need for adaptation and change across all sectors in Europe, which makes open innovation a viable model for market expansion that allows for relevance, speed, and agility. This means, as opposed to bringing existing offerings into highly destabilized European markets, we will need to generate and scale innovation within market over an indeterminate period of time and with a perpetual cycle of adaptation. This means there is abundant opportunity for a dynamic Korea with world-class technologies, know-how, and capability, and whose businesses have already shown how quick and willing they are to adapt. However, even though Europe could benefit greatly from Korean innovation, if the past is any indication, markets may withdraw and become insular in response to this existential need for change and innovation, and connecting European needs with Korean capabilities will likely not happen organically on its own. There's a need for systematic channels for rapidly identifying local needs and validating relevant Korean know-how and capabilities in a way that mitigates the risks inherent in the implementation of true innovation, the development of which spans geographies and cultures. Effectively, we need to build durable bridges of support that instill confidence and address ever-changing needs as we transition to whatever normal eventually looks like. But it is this transitional market of 2020 that will define the market of 2021. So let's collectively build these partnerships in this time of need and look forward to all the potential that outcome will provide. Thank you to all the hosts of NextRise in 2020, and to KITA in particular for the chance to speak with you today. And I wish everyone a successful and productive continuation.